Got it.
Paul Minter was a member of the British Army for 18 years after joining the Household Cavalry Regiment at 16 years old. He served with both Prince William and Prince Harry during his 5 frontline tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Upon leaving the army, Paul suffered with PTSD and lost several friends to suicide. This prompted Paul to help set up the Head Up charity, for which he has just completed a 5,000-mile run around the coastline of the UK. This phenomenal effort earned him national acclaim during the recent Pride of Britain Awards. Wow. Pleasure to read that, Paul, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's good. It's always nice hearing a bio about myself and where I've been and what I've done.
And it's an impressive list. Welcome, Paul. Really good to have you with us today. We want to talk about that key idea of challenge. And you've just finished a 5,000-mile run that Alan mentioned around the sort of circumference, the coastal line of the UK. Tell us a little bit about why you did that.
So, as you said, I was in the armed forces, in the army for 18 years. Unfortunately, towards the end of my time, I suffered quite heavily with paranoia, anxiety, and depression. I found multiple different ways how I can improve my own day-to-day life. During this time, I lost lots of friends to suicide, 7 in total by the time I left. And it really prompted me to try and help more people. For me and some friends, we set up a charity, Head Up Charity, and we're developing a 7-day positive mindset retreat. And we don't come from the charity sector. We're not overly business-minded. So we decided to use our strengths, which is kind of grit and challenging ourselves and getting the public attention, media attention. So we've all come up with our own separate challenges. And I thought, what a better way than reaching the general public, the media, but also doing a real bit of market research with veterans and armed forces personnel, and actually running around the whole perimeter of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Isle of Wight and Isle of Man, speaking to multiple different people, getting people involved and seeing what kind of help people want, what's going right and what's going wrong in all the extremities around the UK.
Wow. And what did you find, other than a hell of a lot of supportive people looking at your Facebook page and speaking to you beforehand? What did you find those conversations were centered around, Paul? What were the key themes that came out of those?
A lot of people that came to see me were armed forces personnel or families who have said that they have troubles, or they don't realize that they have troubles. They just kind of see the struggle that they have as now their day-to-day life, and they often think that it's just them that are living with these problems. And when I go around and I speak to them and I say, look, I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of armed forces personnel and veterans, and your conditions or what you're feeling and your emotions are very similar to lots of other people. And actually just talking to people on a one-on-one basis whilst running or sitting down over a cup of coffee really opens people's eyes up and actually shows them that they're not alone, and there are things that they can do to make themselves feel better, and they don't have to live like that throughout the rest of their life.
This sort of just me idea, this idea, I think you've just, if I've understood you correctly there, this idea of people just wanting their feelings validated, wanting to know that maybe they're not alone and they've got every right to feel as they do and there's a way out. Is that something that's a common theme that you've seen from coming from the armed forces and the things that you're obviously having to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, or I don't have any specialist counselling degrees, but I have got very much lived experience from an extensive time in the armed forces with lots of variation of different friends and people that have opened up to me. And one thing I would say is, when you are in the army, especially over the last 15, 20 years where we've been heavily involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, when you go onto the battlefield, it's very difficult for a lot of people to comprehend, but you have to go to war, which is exactly what it was. You have to be in a certain mindset. You have to be battle ready. You have to have a warrior mindset. You have to be willing to run into bullets, run into buildings, not knowing what's going on, whether you're going to get blown up. You have to watch people get blown up and carry on. You have to do what's expected of you on the battlefield. And to get you to that sort of conditioning mentally, especially in coming from the Western world where we're very comfortable, takes a lot of hard training and a lot of calluses of the mind. And the army are very good at doing it. They'll spend years and months getting you to that position. And it's only rightfully so. You can't go in half-hearted. You have to, really be in the mindset to deal with what you're about to deal with. But what they don't do is they don't bring you back down again. And lots of people are coming out of the armed forces or away from tours or away from the training that they're doing in the armed forces with still feeling that sort of aggression, that sort of high level of alertness in their brains, and they just haven't calmed down from it. And now what happens if they're going into normal life, and they've got frustration, they've got anger issues, all these sorts of confusion that are going on subconsciously or consciously in their mind, and they just need to find ways how they calm themselves down.
So there's a specific and very intentionally developed mindset that's created, but there's no sort of soft landing on the other side. There's no reintegration back into what you were sort of before, or how you reintegrate back into that sort of civilian atmosphere. Tell us a little bit about the mindset that you need to be able to go on 5 tours in the Gulf and be a part of the army in the way that you were.
You have to be. What often happens, and it starts from training, is you get used to not caring. So you'll be woken up at all hours of the day in the morning. You'll have sleep deprivation. You will be eating pretty rubbish food, so you don't really you're taking all the comfort that you're used to of growing up is taken away from you, to the point you don't care whether you're cold, you don't care if you're hungry, you don't care if you've got to carry 30-40 kilograms on your back for 10-20 miles. You just get on with it, and then you get put into a position where you are trained to kill. That is the ultimate position where a lot of frontline soldiers are put into. So again, you have to be put into a mindset where you're willing to do that over and over again, but you're willing to watch your friends and potentially yourself be blown up, and not knowing what's coming around the corner, and then keep going, not just day after day, but continuously, battle after battle. And sometimes you could be on a mission or a firefight that continues. You might have one firefight, it might stop for a little bit, and another one happens. So it's throughout the day, and you've got to be willing to keep going and not to really think about the consequences that or the more severe consequences that could happen.
I'm really interested there, Paul, just to go back a few steps, and you talked about getting used to not caring there, and I met you 15 years ago, and I tell you're a guy that really cares. That must be really hard. And that time when you did come over to Spain and you did a speech as a young man, it was probably the first time you'd spoke in public to a group of students about your experiences on tour. From then on, you must have done another 4 tours, I think it must have been by then, 18 years. How did you keep going back, Paul? What motivated you to keep going back, knowing the dangers that they were there, what you'd seen, and those lived experiences that you talk about? That's the challenge. How did you do it?
I think the first thing to recognize is most soldiers, or whatever service you come from, they enjoy their job. I can sit here and I can kind of paint a picture of it being horrific and terrible because we're talking about the mental health side. But actually, we were part of a really strong group of people, men and women. We knew what we were doing. Also, we were helping people. When I saw you 15 years ago, I was 20 years old. I just done my first tour. I was a gunner. We were the first people out into Afghanistan, and I saw the horrific things that the Taliban were doing to the local nationals. And I'm not going to go into graphics because people probably don't want to hear this on the podcast, but it was terrible. And we were chasing the Taliban away, and the villagers, women, children, men, elders from a Muslim background were coming up to me as a 20-year-old young white guy and kissing my hand and saying thank you. And we were stopping this from happening. So as far as we're concerned, in our heads, we're the good guys. We're the heroes that are coming in and saving people, which is exactly to an extent what we were doing. And but also you get used to it. You get used to going out there and doing it, and it's a real buzz to. When I saw you, that tour I just came back from, I actually got blown up very badly in an ambush with rocket propelled grenades, which is unfortunately less than half of us survived that ambush, and the three of us had to fight our way out of it. And it took us 20 minutes to fight our way out. We were outnumbered by probably about 10 to 1. We managed to get out, and as horrible and as horrific as that situation was, you kind of get this invincible sort of phone about you, like, I survived that. How did that happen? And then the buzz wears off, and then you're almost chasing it again. It's a very strange one, but you get used to it.
So you talk there about feeling invincible, but you've seen some mates obviously being blown up and die. Did you ever get to a point where we think it's my time and I can't do this anymore? Did it get to that point, Paul?
I would say it didn't get to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. I certainly got to a point where I was like, it's my time. And I actually got to the mindset, and it happens quite regularly to a lot of people that go back and forth on tours, is where I didn't care about dying. I almost wanted it to happen to an extent. And for me, running into a building where there was Taliban on the other side, people might approach you with a bit more caution. Towards the end of my tours, I was just running through doors. My life didn't seem as important as it would have done 10, 15 years ago, which is a bad place to be mentally. But that's going to cause all sorts of problems later on, which it did.
Yeah, that's how did it then transpire? Then you've done your tours, and you've just described there, didn't care about dying, and you've got loads of people that care about you, and that didn't even go through your head. So then you get back from these tours. What happened?
I'd say after my fourth tour, so I was part of the Household Cavalry Regiment, as you mentioned in the beginning, but I actually joined another specialist unit called the Brigade Reconnaissance Force, and we kind of work in four-man teams, and we go on in quite often in helicopters and do small man missions, very quick, very rapid, but very aggressive. And I think I came back from that one, and I'd really started to suffer with paranoia, terribly, where I'd be walking down the street and I think people were talking about me. I thought I was being followed, and I almost had two minds. I had the paranoia mind and then the normal Paul mind telling myself to stop. But then the paranoia one would be a lot more powerful than the other one, and it's a very confusing state. And I'd never felt anything like that before, and I thought I was going mad. I didn't know what was happening, but I also at the same time genuinely thought that people were out to get me, and it led to all sorts of problems. So eventually I didn't want to go outside my room anymore, so I ended up pretty much living in my room for months, and that led to depression, and it was just a horrible cycle, really. And also I was quite high up in the ranks. I had lots of people below me. A lot of people looked up to me because of the stuff that I've done and the courses that I've been on. So I felt like I was letting a lot of people down. So there was a lot of mixed emotions and feelings that I really had never experienced before and didn't know how to deal with them.
There's so much that, in almost stereotypical military fashion, you've just delivered in factual statements for us. In that last 5 or 6 minutes, that's so deep. There's so much woven into it. One of the things that really jumps out at me, and I'm not sure if it's a question or maybe a comment at this stage, but you talked about paranoia, going from bashing down doors to fight enemy soldiers, to fight terrorist groups. And obviously in those situations, you are face to face with danger. You literally couldn't be any closer to danger if you tried. And then you're coming from that into a seemingly very comfortable civilian life with zero threats around, yet bringing that paranoia with you. It almost seems contradictory, doesn't it? That you would probably almost expect the opposite to be happening, that you'd come to normal civilian life and just think, this is incredible. It's a fun fair. I can go and do exactly what I want because I'm not in that threatened position. Was it always like that, Paul?
No, not really. This came a bit later on for me, a bit further down the line. I think what there was a bit earlier on, I had quite a lot of dreams or nightmares, or I'd be very quick to be maybe a lot more high tempered than I would have been prior to have gone on tours. But I kind of dismissed that a lot. It was kind of like, oh, it's a phase, it's going to go, it will pass through, or you just get used to it. But no, the paranoia came much later on, and I very much think it's a subconscious thing. I haven't actually delved into it very deep with a psychologist. I'm sure there's all sorts of reasons as to why it happens in the brain, but it's certainly not. I'm certainly not a one-off case. There's tens of thousands of armed forces personnel that have exactly the same experiences.
That's really interesting. You just said you've not talked through that with anybody. So you're telling me this incredible guy that's served our country, done 5 tours, been in the armed forces for 18 years, and our country has not provided you with someone to talk to. Am I getting that right, or have you chose not to?
So when I finally did get some help from a fantastic doctor who kept telling me to come and see him, the help I got in the army, I felt personally wasn't right. I spent about 3 months talking to a psychiatrist, counselor, I'm not sure what you'd call them, but I never got any answers. And I kept saying, look, what can I do? I keep coming to see you almost 2 or 3 times a week. All we're doing is talking, and I'm not getting anything back. And after 3 months, I kind of gave up with it, and I said, look, this isn't going anywhere, and I moved away from it. But another big problem I found, that all the help in the army, what they keep everything in-house. They don't like to air their dirty laundry in public. So all of the help that you get in the armed forces is in their environment. And I said to my doctor that I said, every time I go there, it's not working for me, because the only way I can really describe it to them was if I was a burns victim, I wouldn't get help next to an open fire, or if I was a road traffic accident victim, I wouldn't get help next to a motorway. But the trauma and the problems I've got is from the armed forces, yet all my help is still in the armed forces environment. And I said, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's incredible. And as you put it so factually there, it's a real missing link that obviously you're trying to provide for now. I just want to come back a step. What answers are you looking for, Paul?
To be honest, I just wanted someone to say, this is what you can do to make yourself feel better. People in the armed forces are very much doing people. We're very we're very hands-on. Sitting down and for me personally, and I know for many others, sitting down and talking to someone who doesn't really understand where you've been or what you've done, it doesn't really help. If anything, it quite often puts more of a victim mark on you. So you're actually gone from feeling quite bad to feeling even worse, because you feel like you're a victim case in some people's minds. That certainly was the case for me.
So you wanted tools, you wanted something you could grab hold of. You were very pragmatic about it. You wanted something that you could do.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted an answer. I wanted someone to say, well, this is probably the reason why, because this is how your brain works. This is blah, blah, blah. These are the hormones. These are your feelings. It's not just you. There's multiple other people, but I just wasn't getting those answers.
And when was when was PTSD first used as a phrase? When was that something that you started to consider?
To be fair, at the very beginning, I mean, I knew that I'd had it. They tried to say that it was probably, I was probably going through a depressive stage of my life. And then they kept trying to go back to my childhood, and that's all they spoke about a lot was, tell me about your childhood. And I thought, look, I had a good childhood. I think the fact that I've been blown up twice, and I've been spent 3.5 years of my life in Afghanistan on the front line, is probably more the reason why I'm suffering with paranoia, not because my mum wouldn't give me 50p one weekend when I was 8 years old.
That's absolutely mental. Describe to us what PTSD actually is, folks. There's a lot of phrases out there, and I've read a lot of stuff about. I love military history, and I love anything to do with military. And LMF was an old phrase, wasn't it, in the First World War and Second World War, lacking moral fibre. And almost that's an insider insinuation. If you're showing PTSD, is it like a thing where you don't want to show that because it might be showing that you don't want to be there, or it's the old coward thing? It's a horrible word. But is there real tension between those words in the army?
Yeah, it's certainly something you don't want to be labelled with. It's come on a long way in the armed forces. They are trying to push it a lot, and especially people who have been now, though, the young people who are in Iraq and Afghanistan in the early days are now the guys in charge. So they get it, they understand a lot more. But for example, for me, I was in charge of 60 men and a bunch of vehicles and a whole load of weapons. I was the senior weapons instructor. I was the person that was arranging all the live firing ranges. I was calling in helicopters, all sorts of stuff. And always, as soon as I saw the doctor, that was it. Everything got taken off my cards. I weren't allowed to be in charge of these guys. I weren't allowed to go near a weapon. So everyone's coming, but then they were like, "Don't worry, no one's going to know." And then all of a sudden, people are like, "We need this doing. Can you give us this? Talk us. Can you go and do blah blah blah?" And I'm like, "I can't." And they're like, "Oh, I see, yeah." And then all of a sudden, that's it. People just don't come to you no more, and you're segregated. And it's not people being horrible. It's that you can't do your jobs in what you see you. So there is a real problem in that sense.
And was that something that you welcomed, although it was difficult? Did you need that? Did you need people to start to leave you alone and to take you off these areas of responsibility? Or was that counterproductive? Was that the worst thing that they could have done, really?
I don't really know. I've thought about this quite a lot. I certainly wasn't in the mindset to be doing it. So to an extent, I'm glad that they took me away from it. But at the same time, it just left me in my room, just there festering. Which isn't a good thing either. I think personally, in these sorts of situations, which there are many of, there should be maybe a squadron or a regiment, a sort of rehab place that someone goes to, and they spend their time there until they feel ready enough to come back to work.
Because you're a highly prized commodity, and it's took a huge amount of taxpayers' money to train you to that level, to suddenly be cast aside because you've got a few issues you might need to talk about. That doesn't mean you can't do your job, does it? Do you know what I mean? You're trying to rehabilitate you so you can do your job. It's like the old Ronaldo thing at the moment, isn't it? He's Man United have got rid of him. He said a few things. He can still do his job somewhere else quite well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's such a fast-moving train, the armed forces. It's changing every single day. Things are changing. People are changing job roles and positions. And if you haven't got the right management in place, then you will be very quickly mismanaged and replaced instantly. And that's just unfortunately the way it goes.
Can I just go back to Alan's comment there and maybe just try and explore that idea of, at the moment, it sounds like from your experiences, obviously, there's a decision has been made, there's responsibilities have been dropped, and you feel a little bit like you said, you're languishing in your room, you sat around almost doing nothing. There's an assumption maybe that if with the right support for a period of months or years, you could go back and do your old job. Is that actually true? Could you, with the right support, go back and do what you did before? Or is it a change that's happened that needs to be dealt with appropriately in a different way?
It's not something that anyone's ever said to me that there's a potential you can do, but I don't know. There may be a way. It's very unlikely for me personally, but for someone with the same sort of conditions who was medically discharged for mental health reasons, if they could prove via doctors and counsellors that they are better and they want to go back into that environment, and I think there could be a potential that they may be recruited back in, but I don't know the answer to that.
And from your experiences, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about what you experienced with PTSD? What were the things that really made your life difficult during that time?
I think it was not having any sort of understanding and awareness of the emotions and feelings. So I'd very much been on an uphill spiral pretty much my whole career up until the point that it really hit me. Looking back and speaking to people, lots of people, friends, family, the wife I had at the time that I'm no longer with, they were saying, "Oh my goodness, yeah, we knew that you had troubles and issues. But we thought that was, you knew about it and you were dealing with it." They'd say they could tell through like aggression or everything I'd done was to an extreme. So whether that be a sport or drinking or whatever it was never done in moderation. Everything was full on.
So did you get into that spiral then, Paul? You talked about there's been an upward trajectory, and then suddenly all that adrenaline drops right off. You're not in frontline service anymore. If you don't mind sharing, what sort of then things were you then getting into to get your buzz? Because as a frontline soldier, how do you get that buzz back in normal life?
Yeah, there's two different ways that kind of goes. You've got that high buzz, that adrenaline need, that adrenaline junkie seeking sort of everything or nothing sort of mentality. But then on the other side, like I said earlier, we were trained not to care. So unfortunately, if you're going to be one or the other, you're either seeking it, and if you can't find it, you quite often you go drinking. There's a big drinking culture in the armed forces, or there has been. It's dwindling down a bit now, but there has been a very big drinking culture. So a lot of people just come together. They go out drinking. Some people would take drugs. Quite often people get into fights, or they go out seeking people that were causing trouble, which quite often isn't that hard, and they'll end up getting in fights and in trouble with the police and all sorts of problems that way. But then on the other hand, because you're so used to not caring, if you're on like some sort of downcome, you could just like sit in your room or just be by yourself for a very long time and just have that sort of numb mindset, which again is almost just as bad as going out seeking high adrenaline.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it, when to think about just being out there and being with your mates, aren't they? Because first and foremost, that sense of belonging must be incredible when you're out there in the army. And then all of a sudden, you're back in civilian life. Where does your sense of belonging then happen? And you talk about not caring, but you did care because you cared incredibly about the people who you served with. And then suddenly you don't have that. How do you deal with that lack of sense of belonging? Or has there been something created as a result? I don't know. You tell me, Paul.
So what happened with me is I spent quite a long time, probably between 9 to 12 months, in a very, very bad place. And I wasn't alone. There was multiple of my friends that were also feeling really bad, but we were just a big group of people feeling terrible, not knowing what was going on, how to help each other. And unfortunately, a number of those friends took their lives. I felt like I was potentially going in the same direction. And one day I decided, look, I don't feel like the work in the armed forces is working for me. I feel like I either do something drastic now, or I don't know where it's going to lead. So what I ended up doing is I spoke to my doctor. He was a very, very good guy, thankfully. And I said to him, I need you to sign me off work for 3 months. I said, I'm going to go and sort myself out. So what I done is I rented a house away from the armed forces, away from the environment. And I didn't really know where to start. So I started to try and change my mindset and have a better positive outlook. So I started looking on YouTube, started reading books, listening to motivational talks, started just finding loads of different things on how I can improve myself. And I started hearing about stuff like morning and evening routines and how best to implement them, learning about visualization and affirmations, learn about hormones, the different hormones we've got on our bodies, how they affect us. I learned about nutrition, but not just about nutrition, about what's good and bad for you, but I learned about the microbiome and the gut and the relation to the brain and how it affects our moods throughout the day. I learned about cold water therapy, animal therapy, ecotherapy, the importance of being outside and being in nature. And I started implementing these myself. I really went to town on it. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, I felt better than I've ever felt in my whole life. I'd almost say that at that moment in time, I was cured for the first time in years, that when, how I've been feeling. And I had lots of friends that was also struggling. So I reached out to them and I said, look, can I give you some hints and tips? It's really worked for me. And they'd seen where I was before. So I started helping them, and they recommended me to their friends. And before you knew it, I had about 40 people. After about 6 or 7 weeks of learning all these different stuff that I was helping on a daily basis. And to an extent, I was so happy, and I was so overwhelmed of how well these different things, or small holistic different things I was using each day were working for me. But at the same time, I was really annoyed that these things were not being taught on a daily, if not weekly basis in the armed forces. And I was really annoyed that I spent months and months of talking to a counsellor that did not work. It probably made me worse, when what they should have done is sent me somewhere or taught, given me these sorts of techniques, and which was so simple to implement in my life.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that idea of bringing it back around to belonging. You talked about trying to chase something, a dopamine hit, some sort of numbness that just took you out of your reality, and the adrenaline buzz that just wasn't there anymore. And then it sounds like you found a little bit of belonging there, Paul, in supporting your friends. And I know it's probably tough to talk about, but you talked earlier about having a group of friends, several of which committed suicide. What kind of impact did that have on you?
It was horrible. I spent my whole life losing friends. I know it sounds a bit weird, but I was on the front line. I've lost a lot of friends on the front line, right beside me, and people that were just, I got a phone call to find out about. So it's not something that is new in my life. It's not a big shock. But what is a big shock is when you don't really have an answer to something. So someone's taken a life. And I'll give you a great example. A friend of mine who I lived on a corridor with, I had dinner with him the night before. We were talking and laughing and joking about stuff. And the next morning I woke up, found him unfortunately hanging outside in the corridor. So there was no lead up to that, no reason why, other than he was just dealing with his own demons that he couldn't deal with. And it's just, there was no message, there was no, this is the reason why. So it's absolutely, it's devastating. It's heartbreaking for families as well, because they just left never with an answer or a reason why.
And I imagine, although it's not an answer as such, when that happens on the front line, and we're sat here in a nice comfortable house on a couch, we can't possibly put ourselves in that position, but I can only imagine if that happens on the front line, there's some part of you from a military background that has been trained to think that is probably going to happen, and that's something that you need to deal with and you move on. I imagine that's very different when it's a friend of yours taking their own life. How did you cope with that? But so in coping mechanisms, because I wasn't in a good place myself, it was very sad. Everyone was devastated, but I was kind of just like, well, they've made a decision. They've chosen not to deal with their troubles anymore, and I hope they're in a better place. So that was always kind of my mindset. As sad as it was, I was always angry, because when you lose someone on the battlefield, the armed forces are very good at making them heroic, which is only rightly so. They've done heroic stuff. They volunteered and sacrificed for the greater good. What happens if someone in the armed forces takes their life is they're actually given a dishonorable discharge, because that's the reason why they say committing suicide, because it's still an offence to do so. So the families are given a letter of dishonorable discharge. But for me and many others, there is no difference between the person who got killed on the front line or those that unfortunately taken their life. It's all because of the same reasons. And it is very sad that the person has a heroic attribute put next to them, and the other is charged as a criminal. Yeah, when the war and the experience is the reason for both of those different kinds of deaths in very different ways. Tell me about the proximity of receiving that letter. So the families actually receive a letter to say the soldier has been dishonorably discharged. Is that pretty much straight away that they get that, along with the news that person's passed? I don't know the whole ins and outs of it. I've just spoken to some families. I'm pretty certain that it's done in the most tactile way as possible. And they may not even receive the letter, but just told, because they're not entitled to benefits after that. There is no pension, there is no payout or anything like that, unfortunately. So they have to be told in that sense. I'm sure it's done in the most tactile way, but it's still not right. Wow.
That leads us round then to your charity that you've helped set up, Paul.
Heads Up, right?
Yeah, Heads Up. Sounds amazing, completely admirable. And I suppose that 3 months then that you took, where you were almost locked yourself away, that was your time then to reflect. That was your time to get your ideas together. Tell us how did you then get it up and running from that? Because I'm sure that's where it all started, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it certainly is where the seed was planted. Like I say, I was helping so many different people, huge success stories coming off them. At this point, I've been told you're going to be medically discharged from the armed forces, which was the worst news I could have ever had. I was expecting to be in the army for the rest of my life up to probably at the age of 65. I was flying through the ranks. I was doing really well. And then I got told, look, you know, your services are no longer required because your mental health conditions. And it was devastating for me.
How did you feel about
It was horrible. I hated it. I didn't expect that news. I didn't want it. I tried to fight it, but they made the decision. During this time, the COVID-19 happened and the first lockdown happened. I was very fortunate. I escaped to the Highlands in Scotland with 3 friends, and we lived in a little hut, pretty much by ourselves, out in the middle of nowhere, and it was lovely. And there was a lock called Loch Tay next to us, and it was quite. I didn't know what the circumference of it was. But I kept saying to my friends, I want to go run around it. And I'm quite a fit person, but I'm not a long distance runner. I am now, but I wasn't a long distance runner then. And I kept saying I want to run around it. And one day I just got up and I ran around. I didn't know how far it was. It turned out to be 34 miles. And as I was running around, just a short 34. And as I was running around, I came up with the idea. I thought, well, why don't we set up a charity and start a retreat with all these different positive mindset, holistic methods that I've been helping other people with, and that helped me so well. And this way we can reach more people, and we can take people away from the military environment. It can be a nice safe space and really make a much bigger impact. I said, well, this is surely what I should be doing. I don't want to sit back and just do a normal 9-to-5 job whilst I feel like I've got all this stuff to offer people. But also during the run, I was out there for quite a few hours. Also during the run, I came up with the idea. I thought, well, how about running around the UK and talking to people and spreading the word and getting some attention? And I came back and I saw my friend Si, who is also part of the charity now. And I just said, oh man, I've got this great idea. And he said, write it down. So I started writing it down, and we spoke about it a bit. And then I mentioned to a few people I was thinking about doing this run and setting up a charity. And I think it was a perfect timing because everyone was just coming out of the first lockdown, and everyone was keen to get out there, and they had that community spirit, and everyone wanted to get involved. And one of my friends mentioned it to someone on the BBC, and then they phoned me up asking me to come in. And I was like, oh, this is it. It's real now, isn't it? I was only kind of toying with your idea a few days ago. Now I've just spoken to the whole nation that I was doing it. So there was no turning back. And I spoke to a couple more friends who I knew were extremely passionate, very well connected and good at networking. And between the 4 of us, that's it. We sat down, come up with a business plan, and then started to develop the charity and going through the process of setting up a full non-for-profit charity.
And there's not much more in terms of accountability than saying it out loud to the on the BBC, is it? That's 100% accountability.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you wanted to put those sort of real life tools that you'd learnt about and that you wish that you'd had, and give people that heads up supports the opportunity to learn those tools and learn the sort of real life application.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, I've seen so many people benefit from it. And it's not just people in the armed forces. Anyone can use these, and it's becoming more and more popular, as we all know, through cold water therapies and finding out the benefits or how that helps us. People are talking more about the gut microbiome and the bacteria we've got inside of us, and how important that is, not just for our physical attributes, but for all our systems, and especially on our mood and mentally. And whole different meditation and breathing techniques are becoming more popular. There's so many different things, and all we want to do is just offer a whole wide range of different things that individuals can use, and just give them awareness and understanding. Because there is a lot of people out there that just don't have an understanding or awareness, or they live in a culture where they think it's all pink and fluffy and it's not for them. But actually, that's not true. Like, it's so important to strengthen the mindset and strengthen our mental well-being, just as it is our bodies, if not more so.
Yeah, there's so many of these different sort of alternative therapies that are looked upon as sort of dark arts or things that weird, strange people do that want to sit on their own for a long time. You know, we have conversations about things like this all the time, and if you're doing nobody any harm, what's the harm in trying it? You know, and doing something to see if it benefits you. And we look back, don't we, over the things that we've done and how we've changed over the last 3 or 4 years. And you mentioned a couple there, like cold water therapy. Alan laughs at me when I do that. And there's so many others that we have these conversations around that work for one person that don't work for another. And I think that's a really important message, isn't it? That, listen, there's 101 things you could possibly do, but it isn't necessarily about having to do all of them every day and waking up at 4 a.m. to do your 25 things on your list, but to try and find the ones that are having that impact on you.
Exactly. And if people don't know about them, or some people might hear, oh, cold water therapy, and they go, no, that's not for me. But what if you go, okay, look, come over here, let me tell you a bit more about it. Let me tell you actually how it works. Let me tell you the effects it's going to have on your body, the long-term and short-term effects, how it affects your mind. Give them a bit more awareness, and then they might go, oh, actually, that sounds like something I could do with. And then, or maybe they'll be like, oh, this isn't for me. But 2 years down the line, their life's completely changed, or 5 years down the line, they're in a completely different circumstance, and they go, oh, actually, you know what? This is something that I remember hearing about this and how good it is for me. I want to give it a go now. So all about awareness and planting that seed. But if someone doesn't know about it, then they can't use it.
That's it. It's just sometimes a catalyst. It isn't necessarily the thing that causes any physiological or psychological change, but it forces you to do something differently or look at something differently. You mentioned there trying to look at something and learn about it. Obviously, everything that Alan and I talk about on this pod is about learning and about trying to approach things with this idea of a beginner's mind. And that's from John Kabat-Zinn, the good mindfulness guru, of approaching everything with an idea of curiosity and an idea of, well, what can I learn from this? And it's incredible, isn't it, how many people you might speak to and maybe just throw out a couple of these suggestions and you'll get those immediate answers of, oh, that's not for me, or I'm not doing that, or there's no chance you'll catch me doing that. And it's sometimes quite interesting, isn't it, to hear the sort of the virality of the defense from people to say why they're not going to do something that they've never even had a go at.
Yeah, I was that person. I was that person about 10 years ago. Not for me, up a hill as I can, you know, and but you know, once I started to learn about them and started to feel the benefits, it's fantastic. Not everything's for me, but I'm very much aware of a lot of different things, and I'm sure in the future I'll be trying more different alternative therapies as I progress and change, my life changes.
So let's go back to that COVID. I mean, COVID's had a massive impact on, I think COVID's had a lot of positive. I know that obviously there's many people suffered and many people died through this pandemic, but certainly in our cases where it helped us to sit and reflect about where we were going in our careers, and we've progressed significantly since then. For you, it seems like it was a period of reflection, and then you've gone on and produced some amazing work with Heads Up, and then looking at how you went around the country with your run. Was COVID then a seminal moment for you then in your period now?
So yeah, COVID, I mean, I think, yeah, I remember at the beginning of it, I've just been told that I was going to get discharged from the army. Then COVID came in, I was like, well, my goodness, what is going on? Like, everything's happening at once. And I remember listening to a podcast with someone on it, and they were saying, look, we've got two choices that we can make here. You can either sit at home for weeks or months, however long it's going to be, and you come out and you got to try and find your way back into life, or you use these weeks and months productively, and you come out, open a whole new fresh door, a whole new fresh you, come out of your cocoon, if you like, and flourish and do something great. And that really stuck with me. And I was like, yeah, let's not fester. Let's not just feel sorry for myself. Let's do something positive. And I think the most positive thing in my life probably has come out of it.
Yeah, it is amazing what you've done since that. And the one question I had right at the start, actually, to come back to is when you're doing your run then, so you've got through COVID, you're on your run. What did you blinking think about every day when you were running? How did you get through them days? Was it going for your life? Were your life like going back, or were you just thinking about what I'm going to do in the future? How did it work?
So we probably haven't got enough time on this podcast to talk about the logistics of the run, but it was incredible. So the run wasn't just a run. I've done it completely unsupported. There were support teams that wanted to support clear the world record. They wanted to come and join me at certain points, or a fan to follow me. And I said, no, I want to engage with the general public as much as possible. So I had different people to meet along the way. Some places I didn't have people to stay with, so I had to try and arrange people to stay with or find someone who knew someone in the area. So I was constantly on the phone to people, even on the run, trying to find a location to stay. I wanted to give as many talks as possible. I was trying to get business meetings, trying to get people involved, trying to talk to other charities in local areas to find out what's going on with their charities and connect and network with them. But also, I was very fortunate to have over 700 people join me throughout the run. So, I mean, the longest someone stayed with me was 10 days. And I think the shortest was a lady ran to me for 100 meters. So, you know, and it was a great variation. The youngest person was about 6 years old and the oldest was 74. So I was constantly talking to people, talking about the charity, about the retreat. But there were many, many hours, days where I was on my own. And I'm good in my own head sometimes. And all I'll be thinking about is the retreat, the charity, or I'll chuck on some music and it'd be nice to listen to music or a podcast. I had hours and hours to listen to podcasts and improve my knowledge and strengthen my mindset as I was running around.
Give us an idea of what podcast you were listening to, Paul?
So I listened to a podcast called The School of Greatness. It's by a guy called Dean Howe. He's a phenomenal person, has lots of inspirational people, and it's all positive. It's always talking about how people can improve and change, and from all different subjects all around the world. They're pretty much every subject you can think of.
Okay. And you mentioned, Paul, you mentioned no support. You did it with no support. It took 7 months. You ran 5,000 miles. What does no support look like in comparison to what you mentioned there when they do world record attempts with a support car, etc.?
So I had all my kit in my bag, which weighed about between 10 to 12 kilograms. I covered on average 29.6 miles a day, but they varied. The shortest day was 18 miles, the longest was 42 miles, and that's 6 days a week. So especially like places up in Scotland, I'd be running all day. I'd leave a town and I'd run 34, 36 miles on my own sometimes. And I wouldn't pass any shops, wouldn't pass any towns until I get to the next one, which is where I'm staying. And, you know, I could be in heavy winds, snow blizzards, rain, hailstones, all sorts. So it can be quite a lonely place. And when I'm not supported, I'm completely reliant on myself, what I've got in my bag, making sure I've got enough water. We had, I don't know if you guys, but you would know about it, but we had the big heat wave this year. And, you know, I carried, what did I carry? 3.5 liters of water on me. And during the heat waves, I was running like 34, 36 miles a day down. And I was down in the southwest coast at that time. And the hills are crazy down here. It's just relentless. And I was having to top that up 2-3 times a day, going into public toilets, topping it up that way, or trying to find a calf, or sometimes even knocking on people's houses, just saying, look, can I top my water up? And but I was very, you know, I was unsupported in the sense that I didn't have a fan following me. I didn't have someone to throw me food or to take my weight. But I did have so much support from the general public. Thousands of people came out to offer me food and water and just cheer me into the towns and villages, or lean out their windows as I'm running past, giving me well wishes. So the support came that way.
You're running 30 miles a day. Tell us about what you're eating.
So I'm a plant-based eater, so I don't eat any animal products. So I did have a really good supplement company that is purely natural, organic stuff, but it also helps take really the toxins out of your body. So I made sure that I had all my supplements, which meant that I knew that I wasn't going to be deficient of anything that I was burning off. Which meant that I was able to eat anything really. I had about 7,000 to 8,000 calories to cover each day. So there's thankfully along the coastline there's lots of fish and chip shops, so quite a lot of chips were consumed. It wasn't always, to be fair, I was probably the unhealthiest I'd ever been in my life because I just had to get food in me. But but my body was burning it. It was just fuel. It didn't matter too much.
It's going to catch up on your body, isn't it? Doing that kind of mileage every day. Tell us about maybe a few of the physiological challenges you might have faced.
So I was very fortunate actually not to get any real major injuries. However, I did quite early on. I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks into my run, as I approached Scotland, Gretna's the first town you come to in Scotland, the southwest coast. I stopped at a place and I slipped in the shower and cracked 2 ribs. Which was not nice. I did not sleep for at least the first 3 days, but I was determined to keep going. I said to my friends at the beginning, I said nothing's going to stop me from achieving each day unless it's so severe I can't even move. So the ribs were difficult. They were probably quite painful for 3 to 4 weeks, and faded away maybe after about 8 weeks. But I managed to get through it. And another bit of adversity, I got bitten by an adder whilst I was out in Essex. I knew I was running through an area full of adders, even adders sign everywhere saying do not enter, careful, but I had no choice unless I turned back, ran 10 miles behind me and tried to find another way around, which I wasn't going to do. So I knew there was a potential I was going to get bitten, which I did, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was fine. I just had it just caused a bit of damage to my leg, but that was it. But probably the worst, by far the worst thing that I've ever experienced, painful wise. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a thing called giant hogweed.
Oh yes, yeah, it's that plant that is a killer, isn't it? It's a horrible thing.
It is horrible. I never heard of it in my life, and I took a wrong detour down the south of Wales. And I thought, being a stubborn person, I thought, I'm not turning back. I'll find another route up here. And I end up going through all these bramble bushes and weeds and these big white weeds, which I didn't know what they were. And I was stamping them down. And I finally found a track. And this instant pain just hit me. The only way I can describe it is if you put your hand over a candle and you get that pain. It was like that, but continuous. And I looked down, and all my legs were blistered. And it was horrendous.
Yeah, but that's a pretty it's a pretty exciting happenings going on. I'm interested. How many pair of trainers, Paul?
Well, you'll be happy to know it is definitely the number one question. How many pairs of trainers do you think I went through over 5,000 miles?
7 months, 30 miles a day. I've got to say 14 pairs of trainers.
I'm going 1 a month. I'm going to say 1 a month.
But then you've got to factor in there might have been like adverse weather or the giant hogweeds ruined one of them. the adders bitten through it.
I'm going 7.
Well, you know what? You're both done very clever, accurate descriptions there, because I was supposed to go through 14. That's what I predicted, but I actually went through 7.
Yes.
And the whole reason is I had a trainer sponsor, and the trainers weren't really working for me prior to the run, and we decided not to go with them, which meant I had to buy my own. So if I had a sponsor, I would have gone through 14. I could have very easily done that, but because I was paying for my own, I clung on to them for dear life as long as possible. So 7.
Paul, are they like? Are they on a shelf at home, or did you bin them?
I hope they're not. They're smelt on it, weren't they?
They were stinking. They were horrendous. People used to pick me up in a car, and I could smell them coming up. So yeah, they weren't good. They were straight into the bin as soon as I'd finished.
I was going to say that you used to take them off at night, and they'd walk themselves to the door for the next morning.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brutal. Right, Paul, we're gonna wind it down. We're very conscious you're a busy man. Tell us a bit more about the Pride of Britain Awards. How good was that?
Yeah, it was really good. It was completely unexpected. I got a phone call whilst out on my run from one of the producers from the Pride of Britain Awards saying You've been nominated by multiple people for the Pride of Britain Awards, and you've been dwindled down to the bottom 4 for the regionals. So I was the regionals for Central. I was living in Leamington Spa prior to that happening, and then I got a phone call saying that I'd won the regionals and I was to go to the Pride of Britain Awards for the finals. And I didn't win the finals. A lady who was very worthy won it, but the experience was great. Lots of famous people. Got to meet Mo Farah, who's one of my idols. A lovely person. Lots of different people were there, and to be fair, it's just another great way to publicise and get awareness for the charity and something to put next to the charity as we go forward, speaking to corporates and media.
Yeah, just tell us how much money did you raise in the end, Paul?
So we raised just over £400,000 in our first year of fundraising. Some of it come directly through the Just Giving page. Like I said, I was speaking to multiple different businesses and organisations. They were putting money in that way, but also dozens and dozens of people fundraised alongside me, which really helped.
And that 400,000 and all the extras coming in now. So what's the plan now? How is that going to be used to help people?
Yep, so we are developing a 7-day positive mindset retreat in Worcestershire. So we're going through the process of speaking to construction companies, trying to get planning permission to develop the retreat, which we're hoping the doors are going to be open by the end of next year, so end of 2023. And anyone in the armed forces or veterans from any service, so Army, Navy, Air Force, and even reservists, doesn't matter what their mindset or mental well-being is, anyone can come and use it for 7 days, put their name down, put yourself onto a course, and they'll just learn multiple different methods, as we've spoken about throughout the talk, on how they can improve their mental well-being and hopefully go away feeling a lot better, but also having a lot more in their toolkit. We already have an 18-month aftercare package in the way of an app, so they can then load onto this app, and each day it will take them, progress them each day from the teachings that they learned at the retreat itself.
Amazing. So you're bringing in those tools and the sort of real life reintegration and that sort of support that people need as they move through that journey.
Exactly.
Amazing. I want to ask you a question just to finish off, Paul. What are your daily well-being go-tos? What's your daily routine involved?
I'd say one of the biggest things for me, especially first thing in the morning, well, the best thing to start a morning is a good night's sleep. So if you can get a good night's sleep, you're on to a winner. And there's multiple different ways you can do that. But I'd say gratitude is a big one for me. I love to wake up in the morning, whether I say it out loud or just say it in my head and just think of as many different reasons why I'm grateful for life or for other people or for anything. I think it's really important to be grateful. I think it's really important to tick off a few things very early in the morning. It doesn't matter how big or small they are. I like to, making the bed is a tick. You've done it. You achieved something. Making sure that I don't know, whether it be a few emails or whatever it may be. You might go for a walk for 5 minutes outside. Just get some nice positive ticks going. Deep breathing, and just being grateful for the world.
It's an interesting one. That it's a very army mentality. They make in the bed. It comes back to you grounded in that. But it was a question that asked to a top CEO, what's your biggest tip you can give? It's in James Clear's Atomic Habits, but biggest tip you can give to start off your day well, and it was making your bed, because if you can make your bed, everything comes after that. It's just a habit stacking. Really cool idea. And I'm trying to get my son to do it, and like, make your bed and you're gonna have a good day. It's like, what are you on about?
And
it looks amazing if I'm like just like trod on him or something. Like, no, it's just make your bed and it stacks it for the rest, and then it's brush your teeth, and then it's like get your school bag ready. It's stacking, in it. It's basically a good one. But so thanks for sharing them, Paul. Last question from us, and we'll let you get on your way. We love this one. 3 people you'd love to go out for a beer with, or go out for a nice meal with, could be dead or alive. What would you talk about? What would be who would you like to learn from?
I'd say 3 people would be, I'd really like to meet Winston Churchill. I think he would be a very interesting person. I'm not actually sure if I'd get on with him or not. I just think that he's such a charismatic, outgoing person, and I think he'd have a lot of stories to tell. I think the night would be very entertaining with him. I'd like to meet the guy that I spoke to about whose podcast I listened to, called Dean Howe, because the people that he's spoken to, the way he comes across, is fantastic. He certainly has helped to direct my life in a more positive way.
Okay, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you, Paul. If you drop him a line, there's a lot of the podcasts now that love that interaction, and if you listen to your story, I'm sure you might get on there.
Yeah, I might do that one day. It'd be fantastic if that could happen. And the third person's a difficult one. I think it'd have to be someone who's had a real impact on Earth, and is a very spiritual person. I'm quite a spiritual person myself. So someone like Gandhi or someone like that, and I have to have a good think on that one. But someone very much in the spiritual sort of sense that I can learn from.
It's been an incredible experience to talk to you, Paul. I wonder, before you go, if you could share with the listeners where they can find out more about the Heads Up charity, the work you're doing, the run that's been completed.
Yeah, so our full title is Head Up Charity. If you Google Head Up Charity, multiple things will come up, different media platforms, but you'd also find all our social media. You can type into any social media platform, Head Up Charity, you'll find it that way. Our website is head-up.org.uk, but you should find that through the Google search. We've got promo videos on there, brochures, everything detailing about what we do. And if people listening not in the armed forces or not in the army, and they think that it's not relevant for them, if you know anybody who is in the armed forces or veterans, please let them know about who we are. The number one thing that we're trying to do is let people know the different services that are available to people that need it. Even if they don't think they need help, there may be a time in their life when they do. But also we're open to, well, when we do open, it's open to anyone. So we're trying to capture people at all different stages of their mental strength and mental well-being.
Phenomenal work you're doing, Paul. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on to have a conversation with us, and good luck with what you're doing in the future.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Paul.